Today, we're going to talk about the role of the youth in political, cultural, economic, and social development. You know that they say we live in a global village, but we also know that all over Africa, we have proverbs like, it takes a village to raise a child. We've heard that before. West Africa represents 4.5% of the global village. So we have a youthful demographic out of that 4.5%, because they say 60 to 70% of the 340 million people in West Africa are under 35 or 30. So today we're going to talk about those issues and how we can galvanize the youthful population and the demographic that we have to generate value for our society, and how we can do things nationally and also galvanize regional cooperation. Today, I have a distinguished set of panelists who will examine this discourse. They will introduce themselves. They will tell you what they do and how what they do connects with the youthful market that we have. I have two nanas on stage. I have Tsonam and I have Elizabeth. So let me start with Elizabeth. Kindly introduce yourself, what you do, and how this concerns everybody here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Bintliff. I'm the CEO of Junior Achievement Africa. Junior Achievement Africa is an organization that is focused on the economic empowerment of youth. And we work with young people starting at a very young age as they enter school up until the age of 35. Our work is focused on entrepreneurship, work readiness, and financial literacy. And we're really focused on closing the gap between what young people learn in school and what they really need to be successful as adults in the world of work. As many of you know, there is a big gap between what young people are learning in school in Africa and what it takes to compete in the global environment. So we work to fill that gap. Nobody is teaching our children how to earn money, how to save money, investment, banking. These are all things that we're learning by trial and error, and we believe that they need to be learning it within the context of school and formal education. Entrepreneurship is also not being presented to young people as an option for employment. We're still creating and perpetuating this narrative in Africa that you get out of school and you get a job, and we all know that not to be true, because our economy is not creating enough jobs to absorb the number of people we're churning out who are coming into the workplace or coming out of school, either dropping out or graduating and needing to be employed. So we focus on that as well. And then finally, we focus on work readiness, which is a big, big problem on this continent. There is this paradox that exists that employers are saying they cannot find young people to employ, and yet young people are saying that they're getting out of school and can't find jobs. So one of those things is not true, or there's a gap somewhere that needs to be closed. So we work on that as well. Our programs are very experiential, they're very practical. And we want young people to really be able to feel and experience what the world of work is really looking for. So I'll give you an example. Last week, just here in Ghana, we did a big job shadow event during the Africa Union Day. And we took couple of hundred people, kids out of school, high school children, and took them into companies just around the Accra area and had them shadow professionals in the fields that they're interested in, just to be able to experience what that job looks like. I had a shadow myself. We were at Airtel, Standard Chartered Bank, and other companies around here. And one of the things that I came away learning about that experience at the end of the day is how remarkable there is little understanding of what it takes to be in the workplace for kids. I had a young woman, I told her to write an email, and she put all of her text in the subject line. And you know, even small things like that, young people aren't learning. We had 50 people in the room at the conference center at Airtel, and about 10, 20 of them were girls. Would not say a word. No matter how much we try to get them to say anything, would not say a word. So for us, those are some of the things that we need to be addressing. It's just, you know, there are many avenues for young people to be engaged, I think, but the ability to participate is a muscle that needs to be learned. Knowing how to speak up, and all of these soft skills that help you to be successful, make you more employable, and make you more aware of how to create opportunities for yourself. So that's our agenda as Junior Achievement in this dialogue. We're in 14 countries across Africa, and I head up the regional office, which is based here in Accra. And we are a part of this agenda of moving young people forward socially, economically, politically, and otherwise. So I'm thrilled to be a part of this discussion today, to listen to you, learn from you, and share my thoughts as well. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nana Samuel Ganda. I am a farmer, an entrepreneur, and a humanitarian worker. I am the CEO of Freshfield Agro Consult and Organics Limited. It's an agro-allied company based in Nigeria, which produces 100% organic fertilizer from waste. And we are a little bit partial because it's strictly an agricultural program. And then we work a lot with youth, about 19,000 registered youths right now, and women inclusive. We offer capacity building to them in different areas of agriculture depending on their areas of interest. It could be aquaculture, it could be poultry production, animal husbandry, whatever it is. We don't force them to go into a particular field. We let them decide. After 2 weeks intensive training, which is free, but I don't offer free training in other parts of the country. I do that in the Northeast because of the insurgency and in a bid to kind of encourage them go into agriculture, because that's the only livelihood that can pay off in the Northeast for now, because most of them are not educated. And then we can't continue to look at them without helping them out. They constitute so much nuisance. And then we are trying to make them become self-reliant and independent and also earn a living, decent living. So we help them focus on agriculture. Then working as a humanitarian worker also in the Northeast, I strictly work with youth and women. I work with the Norwegian Refugee Council, mostly outside of Maiduguri. Then I teach them livelihood activities, also strictly in agriculture. I don't know, I'm a little bit partial because I was trained like 3 years ago in Thailand, and I never wanted to study agriculture. Then I found myself there somehow, and then I decided to make a living out of it. So after I returned from my training, I started offering free consultancy to whoever calls me. Come and see my farm, check out this, check out that, and I do it freely. And things were moving on fine. Then it occurred to me, I can actually turn this into a business. So that was when I came up with the idea of registering my own business and then started touching lives. But I strictly work with youth.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks. Nana.
Hello, everyone. So I'm the Executive Director of WACSI, the West Africa Civil Society Institute.
Really? So I was sitting with her and never knew.
And I'm sure you must have met my wonderful colleagues already. WACSI is a capacity development institute for civil society in West Africa. We believe that civil society has a critical role to play in ensuring that we have sustainable development in West Africa. And so our focus is on strengthening the institutional and operational and technical skills of civil society. And for us, it's critical. If we want to address the issue of development in West Africa, to look at the challenge with leadership. We believe that we have a major challenge. We have a leadership deficit in West Africa. And that is what has contributed to where we are today. So if we want to move ahead, we need to address that. And that is where our connection with youth comes in. Because we believe that if you want to grow leaders, you have to look at the youth. You have to target the youth. We run a number of programs related to this. We have our Next Generation Leadership Program, which has a number of phases and different aspects to it. It has the Next Generation Internship, where we have young West Africans join us, work with us for 6 months. And during that time, our aim is to enhance their civic consciousness and build their professional capacity. So they actually work with the different programs within WACC, and they contribute a lot to our programming and the implementation, the formulation of the program, the implementation of the program, the monitoring of the program. They are part and parcel of WACC. And a lot of the innovative things that we do, the ideas come from them. We have also the Civil Society Leadership Institute, which targets the middle management level within the civil society sector. Because many of the leadership programs that we have target the executive directors. So we looked at a specific program that looks at how we can strengthen self-leadership, how we can strengthen organizational leadership, and importantly, how they can use that to impact their societies, working with their organizations and making sure that they achieve the missions of their organizations. So we are grooming a crop of leaders within civil society who would be able to really bring about the difference that we want, addressing their, looking at their knowledge, looking at their skills and their attitudes. So this is another aspect of our program. Then we have the third aspect, which is the Next Generation Research Fellowship, which targets young researchers and gives them the opportunity to produce research on civil society and development, looking at governance, looking at leadership. We need to curate knowledge on this aspect and actually have the kind of information that we need and knowledge that we need on civil society and for civil society to use to contribute to the work that they do and to actually make the impact that we want them to make when it comes to development. So these young researchers would be working, they come work with WACC, do have a particular research project. They have mentors who are senior researchers, so they actually learn from them, and then they produce the research. So apart from building their own capacity, they also have these mentors that they work with, and they actually produce the knowledge that we can use. And we work with Yali Mandela Washington Fellowship Program because it is an amazing program. It is an amazing program. I mean, if we are looking at West Africa and leadership, this is one of the programs that is a flagship for West Africa. And so we are proud to be associated with it, and we are the implementing partners in West Africa with IREX for West Africa. Then we also run the civil society track for the Yali Regional Learning Centers. I'm sure you know about those as well. We also run that. So for us, addressing the youth issue, or for some, there are many challenges. We look at it from the leadership perspective, and that is where we make our contribution. So thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Tsonam.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Please allow me to begin by thanking IREX for inviting me, USAID and all the other partners, and also very importantly the Regional Advisory Board. I think they've done a great work. Please clap for them. I witnessed one of their meetings. It's been really packed. Also, I've seen Papso. Papso is with USAID. Really great guy. Please clap for him. Do we have any fellows from the Clark and Lana University? Please clap for them. They are the best fellows so far. Great. So my name is Tsonam Akpeloo. I'm involved with so many things, but
Can you clap for him too?
You don't have to. Yeah, so number one, I work for technology company, Techcom Visions. It's a software development firm. We're here based in Accra. We have clients in about 8 countries. We do different aspects of technology, software development, system integrations, among others. The next thing I do is to represent Ghana in African Union ECOSOCC. So every country has 2 elected honorable members representing in African Union ECOSOCC. And I'm one of the representatives from Ghana. Within ECOSOCC, I'm the youth advisor of the organ and also the focal point of Agenda 2063, which I'm sure all of you are very familiar with at this stage. And in that capacity, you realize that 2063, it's almost more than 40 years from now. And the visionaries of the agenda are leaders who are naturally aware that this vision can only be realized if we work with young people. Because by 2063, everybody will know that most of the leaders who are designing this project now may not be there. I'm not wishing them that they are going to die, but I'm saying that it's only natural that it will be you and I who would be at the helm of affairs. And so in designing this program, there have been an extensive consultation among all stakeholders on the continent and beyond. They've consulted women groups, youth groups, and the people. So this is the first time in African Union where we have a people-driven program with different aspirations. And all these are anchored on the belief that the young person should be at the center of development of the continent. And so I like to say at this point that we should see ourselves as the conduit of achieving the goal rather than consumers of the program. We should be the ambassadors of the Agenda 2063, and in our different many ways that were affecting life, we should know that everything we're doing is just so we can all achieve the Agenda 2063. African Union, it's a policy organization. What it means is that a group of 54 leaders gather to decide, what is good for the continent. So policy can only be effective when it has a comprehensive implementation package. And implementation will not necessarily happen at the African Union level, but it will have to come down to the national level. And at the national level, it's where different departments, ministries of state would tailor-make their programs to fit into the agenda. So you and I are the main implementation agents of policies of government. And so what is important is to begin to even know of the program before we can even talk about implementation. Very often, most of us young people are in hurry to recite about the challenges rather than to focus our energies in creating the actions required to achieve the program. And so I would like all of us as people who have been identified as really young leaders of the continent to begin to be on the side of action, to begin to work towards stardom of development. I would like to conclude with a scenario of the football field. You realize that in the football game, there are different actors. So there are players, about 11 players. Among the players even, you have star players. Then there are other actors like the fans. But you see that you have about thousands of fans all come together to watch the players play. Now, in the players, they are star players. But in the fans, there's no such thing as star fans. A fan is a fan. I want to propose to you to be part of the players, where everybody will look up to you to deliver for the continent. Thank you.
Thank you. You guys will agree with me. Sounds like a politician. Serious one. Okay, so Tsonam, you say you're an elected member of ECOSOCC.
Yeah.
How can you explain to fellows the process to become elected on the AU, on this AU body, and how can they be part of this team that you talk about? How did you become elected? And if there was anybody here who aspired for a similar role in the AU, how can they get that done?
Thank you. That's a good question, and it's been asked all the time. So, number one, the African Union work with organs. So there are organs of the African Union. We have the organ of the head of state, which is like the Parliament of Presidents of Africa. It has 54 membership. It's currently under the chairmanship of the President of Guinea. Now, we have the organ of the Commission of the African Union, which is like the administrative wing of the African Union. Its headquarters in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. So we have the organ of the Pan-African Parliament, which is a parliament of parliamentarians. Every country has 5 elected honorable members to that organ. But to be part of that organ, you need to be a parliamentarian to aspire to become a member of the parliamentarian organ. Then we have the organ of ECOSOCC. So ECOSOCC is the Parliament of Civil Society of Africa. Now, every civil society organization on the continent, be it national, regional, or continental, is qualified to receive an accredited membership of the African Union. So what it means is that there's a process. You go online, you fill a form, etc., and then you are accredited to the African Union, ECOSOCC.
Okay, thank you.
No, okay. Let me just conclude, 30 seconds. Right. So after you receive accreditation, then accredited members have become eligible to be selected to contest to become members. So they will call a General Assembly where they will have elections and people will be elected to the organ. Okay.
You're full of, you've been talking about organs and organs and organs. And there's so many organs in the African Union. Are you one of the youngest members in the African Union?
Well, I became the youngest elected member.
Okay.
2014.
So we need more people, more Yali people to join him. It sounds like a joke, but it's a serious matter. We complain about exclusion of the youth in leadership, but that exclusion does not happen overnight, or did not happen overnight. It's a journey, it's a process. So whilst he might be there now, we need more people like him to join so that we can always have this bigger organ, as it were, to function. She talks about organic agriculture, but agric is just one sector that has the potential to engage the youth. You talked about skills and jobs, and we all understand the concept of white-collar jobs, blue-collar jobs. And then there's a new field called new-collar jobs. I'd like Elizabeth to explain what that is in the context of how institutions are galvanizing this opportunity of the youth to generate value for Africa.
Sure. So new-collar jobs, as I understand them, are the jobs that are emerging. So one of the things that we know now when we look at the job market is that the jobs that will exist in the future, even 10, 20 years from now, we don't know what those are. They don't exist in our context because our economy just hasn't, and our society hasn't evolved to that. So new-collar jobs is the beginning of that evolution. What are the jobs that are coming? And a lot of the new-collar jobs reside in IT. So digital jobs and digital literacy is going to be the language. It already is, but even more so, it's going to be the language of the future. You know, we came from having to learn ABCs, literacy and numeracy, and that's important. But for you guys going forward, your language is going to be digital. You're all digital natives, and that's the world in which you all operate. And one of the things that I say often, and I'll say it here again, is that the difference between where you come from and where your parents come from is the difference between rotary phones and cell phones. I say rotary phones, half of you probably don't even know what those are if you remember. But it's as different as night and day. So new collar jobs are that. It's the jobs of the future. So now that we know that these jobs are coming, how do we prepare ourselves, right? It is very important that we as young African leaders be able to speak that language of digital literacy that allows you to be able to access these new collar jobs. And digital literacy is going to be very, very important moving forward. But we can't just look at those jobs in a vacuum, right? So computers and cell phones, they're important because that's how we communicate for the most part, and that's how we interact, and that's how we transact. But we're also fundamentally humans. And our ability to interact as human beings is also critical. So I think that the people who are going to be successful in the future are going to be those who are able to speak a digital language and be able to be fluent with digital languages as they are with their soft skills. And when you combine those and go into the workplace, I think that that's where success is going to be. But not just success. We talked about inclusion a little bit. Inclusion is, I think digital literacy is going to be key to inclusion and participation, because a lot of the conversations that we have to have, whether it's on a national level, regionally, continentally, internationally, globally, and all of that, those conversations are being had as much face-to-face, but mostly digitally. So when we talk about new collar jobs, that's where I think we're going.
Okay, thank you. You know, we talk about jobs and jobs and jobs, but every year, it seems there are fewer jobs. Mm-hmm. More people come out of school, but there are fewer jobs. But there's plenty of work, mm-hmm. even though there are fewer jobs. The work keeps increasing. So I think this concept of jobs is a paradigm shift that we need to make. Mm-hmm. You exist in the agricultural space and all of that. Beyond agric, what do you think, or even within and outside agric, what can we do as young people? What are the roles? What's the value chain? Explain the value chain for us and where the opportunities are.
Okay, first of all, the youth themselves have to change their attitude towards agriculture. That's one. They don't see it as a lucrative business. They see it as a poor man's job or a poor man's activity. So when you view it that way, you don't expect to make something good out of it. Then there are different value chains in agriculture, depending on what you want from start to finish. And then it depends on which field you want to find yourself in. You can decide to be a farmer. There can be an off-taker somewhere for you. And that's what we are currently working on in Kaduna State. The Central Bank of Nigeria came up with a project, the Anchor Borrowers Program, where they grouped youths into different segments. They have the growers, they have the off-takers, then they have those who add value to what they produce. And then this is how it goes. You don't produce and don't have anybody to off-take. Usually it frustrates them. And then, so they decided to create an avenue for them to dispose of whatever it is they produce, and also provide inputs for them, like on loan basis. After they must have generated their income, they pay back at subsidized rate. And then we're also working on something like that in Maiduguri with about 9,000 youths. And we are strictly going into millet, cowpea, and then groundnut production. That's also working towards food security and nutrition for the IDPs. Yesterday, Natasha did a presentation on plum nuts. She said she can produce what we normally import from outside. And then if somebody like that can be patronized, you can imagine the encouragement it will give. It will be an inspiration to other youths who look at agriculture the other way. So I think youth need to be engaged, like continuously. They just don't need a voice. They need a place to be heard, to be listened to, and their contributions respected and acted upon. Usually in the agri sector, they implement projects without involving the youths at the decision-making stage. I don't know why they do that, but when it's time for implementation and they want to be heard, they call youths from all corners and all angles. And then you hear about the project, and after a month or two, it's gone. It doesn't become sustainable because they don't involve us at the implementation stage, at the decision-making level. Youths have different perspectives towards different fields in life. It must not be agriculture. There's the finance sector. She talked about capacity and skills, vocational skills, and all that. So we need a place, we need a voice, and need to be considered. And our contributions need to be valued as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So essentially, what you're saying is that for the youths, we need to look at agric sector, not just as a development issue, but also as an investment matter.
Yes.
Something that we can go into.
Yeah.
So most of the farming communities now are people who belong to the aging demographic.
Yes. And
so
these are people that don't move with time anymore.
So if you're going to engage technology,
yeah,
and do all these new things with agric, we need to bring in the youths, right?
Yeah.
So you've talked about the deficit of leadership. I think there's also a deficit of responsibility amongst the youths. Will you agree with me? To some extent, there is a deficit of responsibility. There is knowledge. There is also ignorance in equal measure. I'm not sure many people understand what the African Union or the African Development Bank is doing. But before you critique them, kindly just take time to study and read what they do. Because I think there can only be policy making and policy formation. It's also all of us, the rest of us, that will galvanize, implement, and execute all of that. Yeah. Nana, I'm sure you agree with some of the things I'm saying.
Yeah, I do to some extent. But I believe that our challenge now is that we have all these very beautiful policies at the AU level, continental, regional, at the ECOWAS level. We have brilliant youth policies. And to some extent, even programs that we have outlined. However, for that to work, you have to come to the national level. Many of our countries have national youth policies. But what implementation program do they have for these policies? What is the budget support that is going to, what's the support that's being given to provide the resources that would enable these policies, beautiful policies, to be implemented? And you also need coordination. Some of them, we have the frameworks. We don't have coordination. You have a National Youth Authority, you have a national service, you have different organizations doing different things, both non-profit organizations and others. There is no coordination of the work that is going on. And then, you don't have a place. She was talking about the youth engaging. How do they engage? You must have platforms, structured platforms, that enable them to engage the key stakeholders, to give them the opportunity to make that contribution. So if the youth are not given the opportunity, they will be unable to make the contribution. And we shouldn't forget the kind of culture that we also have. I think that to some extent also affects the way youth are allowed into the decision-making space. Because the assumption is that as a young person, you don't necessarily have the experience and knowledge that is needed to make a meaningful contribution where decisions have to be taken. So I believe strongly that if we give our youth the opportunity by putting in place not only the policies, but the institutions that have to support those policies, the resources that have to enable the implementation of those policies, and give them the opportunity to engage, we would actually see a difference. And it's not only the agric sector, the service sector. And if we want to grow, build West Africa, we cannot forget manufacturing. You know, that is also critical. Technology. We are in the 4th industrial revolution. And where we are going, we need technology, people who are tech smart, who can actually bring about the kind of innovations that we need. I was in a meeting last month that was looking at some of the innovations in Rwanda. And these were young people. I mean, somebody had come up with an innovation where you could, he was producing, he was using drones to send blood to far, to villages that had very bad roads, remote areas, so that they could get this blood supply. And I've just heard something that is just amazing, the one on the vaginal discharge. So how many of our youth, and I'm sure there are so many of these brilliant ideas, how many of them, when we talk about technology, and we should look at our educational system. Many of those learning ICT have never seen computers. They learn about computers, it's drawn on the board for them. They've never seen it, they've never used it. So how would you expect that same person to compete favorably with a young person of their the same age, yes, same generation from another continent, Europe, America? It's very difficult, and that is where I think that we need to look at addressing those issues. So you can talk about the responsibility of the young person. I think that young people also have to be responsible, but it doesn't just come. It must be nurtured. And it must be done consciously. That is why for us in WACC, addressing that issue of leadership and making a deliberate, conscious effort to actually groom leaders, we find very important. And it must be at all levels, right from our, primary, non-formal, informal, formal education. We have to find ways of grooming leaders, of getting our young people to have that civic consciousness, of giving them space to make a contribution. And I'm proud to say, and I said it earlier, a lot of the innovations we come up with in WACC comes from the young people, and you will see that my colleagues are very young. It comes from them. They bring the ideas for us to implement, and it's because they have the opportunity to do so. So I think we need to check that.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you. So there are several issues here. You talked about technology and platforms. Social media. What are we as the youth? What do we do when we spend our time on social media? I want Tsonam to address that, right? Are we effectively using social media to do these things? And then, Nana, I'm going to come back to you. You talked about doing things in an organic manner, right from childhood, right? So things have to happen by organic or by design or by default, right? Now, how do we transform the actions to outcomes, right, and to results? So, Tsonam, take on the social media thing, and then Nana.
So, social media has emerged as one of the single most powerful tool in achieving all kinds of things today in the global world. I know that some of the richest people on earth today are rich because of social media. What I would like to suggest to my fellow young people is to see the economics of social media rather than the fun and the other side of it. There's a lot that happens on social media on a daily basis. In fact, social media has been used to even change governments and regimes. Even the most dictatorial regimes have been changed using social media. And also, the most monies have been made from social media. What is important is to create innovation around social media that generates value, that make impact, and that is innovative. And I think that if we begin to look at things like that very seriously, we can change the continent so much using social media. So
we have a lot of technology innovation hubs around West Africa, right? Yeah. Is it possible for the AU that you work for as an elected member to go locate these hubs, these innovation centers, and help galvanize funding for them?
Okay. that's a good call. So what I think that we're not reading enough. So there's a lot happening in this regard. I'm aware that the science, technology, and human resource outfit of the African Union engages all innovation hubs on the continent, not only engage them, but support them actually at very transactional level. And a lot happens. So some are direct, some are indirect. They bring them to so many meetings, they support them. What is important for you and I now is to read and isolate the opportunities that we have in the system.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Because my reason for asking that was to connect policy to execution. So we don't just speak English and have all these organs, and we don't know what these organs are performing.
Yeah, the truth is that my background is, it's business, really. I am more pro-action than just the conversation.
Yeah.
And we're really changing the narrative. Business is no longer usual. A lot of young people are taking their destiny to their hand. A lot of young people are really creating, because we've gotten to that stage where we realize that it can no longer be the conversation. It has to be action. It has to be action backed by value, by innovation, and by impact.
Okay. So, Nana, you want to talk about actions to results to outcomes?
Yeah. I think, for me, education is very important. And I think that we have to relook at the kind of education we provide for our youth in our different countries. Many of us are still stuck to the colonial framework, the colonial kind of education. And so, I'm talking now about formal education. We churn out graduates into a job market that has transcended what they have been taught. And so you realize that they've come out, but the jobs are not ready to receive them, because the capacity that they need for them to enable them do the jobs, they don't have that. They've not been taught that. So I think that is extremely important. We have to really address that. And even the issue about civic consciousness, I believe we can start in our schools. We talk about Kwame Nkrumah as a visionary leader. One of the things that Kwame Nkrumah pushed and championed was Pan-Africanism, and a belief in one's identity as an African, and if you are a Ghanaian, as a Ghanaian. How did he do this? Many ways, but one of the targets was young people. Indoctrination. Why do the Americans think that their country is the greatest? It is indoctrination. Patriotism is sown into them from childhood. So by the time they are able to speak their minds on anything, you can fight with them on anything. They believe in America. How many of us have that kind of patriotism for our countries? So education is extremely important, formal education, but also the informal education. And here, I think the vehicles would be, for us, the faith-based organizations, our faith-based institutions. Many of us in West Africa are extremely religious. Whatever our pastor or our imam says is what goes. How have we engaged these institutions in bringing up our youth? How have our governments even engaged them when we are talking about productivity, productive youth? Have our governments engaged them because they have such a mass following? You know, so how have we engaged them to also get the kind of youth that we expect? So I think these are some of the ways that we can also look at how we can actually get the kind of outcomes that we have. I've already talked about having the institutions and the resources, so I don't want to repeat that. Yeah. But I think that we should use the educational system and also use some of our informal structures like the churches and the mosques.
Yeah, so in a way we can transcend not just business. We can go into cultural space. The religious space?
It is critical.
Political space?
It is critical. If we want to make change in West Africa, we cannot make that change without engaging these institutions, because they are the ones who actually determine, a lot of the time, our daily actions. Yeah. So we need to engage them and through them, use them to bring about the kind of change that we want.
Okay, so the concept of poverty being a disease is real. You know, poverty is everywhere. There's also poverty in other continents, not just Africa. And perhaps we can look at other climes for exemplars of case studies or things that are happening in that space. So we have companies, we have communities, and we have citizens. What should these three silos, you know, do in Africa? Can you give us examples of how it's done, Nana? How your example from Asia? Are there things we can borrow from them, you know, and domesticate, as it were, for ourselves in West Africa?
Yes, first is the sufficiency economy culture. First is the sufficiency economy culture. There I learned that small is beautiful. You know, we usually want to start businesses in a big way, or want to start big so that you make a name for yourself. And in a short while into the business, you find out that things crumble. So it's always good if you start from somewhere. Maybe I'm a farmer, I said, so I have to keep using agricultural examples. So maybe you want to start cultivating a land for rice. You can't just take out 2,000 hectares at a go. You should start with maybe 5 hectares, 10 hectares, depending on how you can handle it. You're not doing it to impress anybody. So you should start little by little. And that's one thing I would like to advise our youths. When I started my business, I had nothing. So that year, I had to use, usually, I don't know if it's a culture everywhere, during Christmas period, they give you money to buy clothes, shoes, and that was what I used that year. I saved it. January, I registered my company. I bought my office equipment and all those things, and that was how I started. In a short while, I started consulting in different parts of the country. First, I was called to Port Harcourt, and then there I trained about 5 youths. Coincidentally, we met on a farm, and then they begged to see what I was about to do with a client. It was an aquaponic system, cultivation of vegetables without the use of soil. We used gravels, and then a fish tank by the side to supply the water and the fertilizer. So they followed us, took part in the whole project, and by the time I spent just 10 days with them, they were just 4 girls. By the time I returned, they had already started their own vegetable farms, because I taught them how to produce theirs and then how to have a continuous production. So at the end of 2 months, they started supplying a supermarket. It's like ShopRite, it's called Spa, with vegetables, lettuce, cucumbers, and tomatoes. And at a point, they ran away because they couldn't beat the demand. But that's how far I have gone in working with them in that area. And I advise them not to bother about the demand. They can switch to market people and start giving, producing or supplying market women, since they can't beat the demand of SPA. Because if you sign a contract and you're not able to beat the demand, you end up paying back instead of getting money from them. So they had to call it off and then continue with market women. It's not that they cannot meet up, but these are students, and they are just trying to, 400 level agric students, and they are just trying to start something. And since it's successful, they said they don't even mind going for national service anywhere. They would stay at home, redeploy back to River State, so that they would run their businesses without thinking about getting a job after school, whatever. And that is because they have decided to embrace their little start. So one thing we can borrow from Asia is the sufficiency economy. You start little, in a little while, it turns like a wildfire. You are heard everywhere. So you just have to calm down and start from somewhere.
Okay, thanks. So it seems to me you're touching on certain interesting points. You talked about starting small, but for me that looks at the cultural ecosystem that we have lots of market women, you know, across towns and villages and cities.
Yeah.
You know, from Dakar to Calabar to Douala.
Yeah.
There are lots of market women. Many of them exist in the informal economy. How can we bring them up so that their contributions, their work counts? Elizabeth? Because some of them are youthful, the young people, you know, who may not have access to the kind of qualifications or educations that me and you can access.
I think that that's a great question. And I also think that one of the least appreciated elements or sectors of our economies is the informal sector. And yet it's such a vast part of Africa's GDP across the board of almost every one of the countries. So we really need to figure out how to either formalize the economy or bring the people who are active within it into a more structured way of transacting. There are things that are being done that I think are helping us make progress in this area. Nigeria, I know, is doing a lot in moving more toward a cashless society, helping transactions and money to be easily moved between people. You know, Kenya does tremendous work. Almost everybody in Kenya uses M-Pesa and transacts in those ways. So I think, again, going back to the digital age and what that allows us to do, making the movement of money easier is one thing. But I think fundamentally what is needed is financial literacy. And one of the reasons why people are not able to transcend doing business at a small scale and moving into something that is more lucrative is because they don't have the knowledge of how to do that, how to break that barrier. Money is still very much a stigma. Discussions around money in this continent are still very much stigmatized. I know that in our experience, we start doing financial literacy with children class 5. And we have programs in class 1 as soon as 5 years old when they come into school, and we start talking to them about money. But I cannot tell you how many times parents will come to us and say, I don't want you talking to my child about money. You're going to make them money-minded. So that's still very much in the culture. And one of the things that we really have to, for young people especially, one of the most difficult conversations and things that you have to manage as you think about your future is really your conversations with your parents and how you manage their expectations of you. Again, going back to the cell phone and the rotary phone, it's a very, very different world. So back to your question about formalizing, I think that financial literacy is very important. People need to know. There are a lot of government programs that exist about banking the unbanked and getting people to have bank accounts and getting them to be able to access loans or government programs. There are hundreds of government programs in development investments around the continent. But the people who are being targeted are just not aware. You know, there's simple things like they don't have a national ID, they don't have a birth certificate, which basically means you don't exist. So there are those kinds of things that need to be done. But if you educate people, you give them power. And if you give them power, then change can begin to happen. Okay. Very soon we're going to call for questions. But before we do that, I think we talk about challenges and problems a lot. Maybe we should also recognize some of the success stories we've had, or the success sectors, as it were. Music and movies in Africa. I think the entertainment industry has done a lot more to integrate Africa than the politicians have. Do you agree with me? Do you agree, Elizabeth? So if musicians from DRC, Congo, and Nigeria and Cote d'Ivoire can collaborate, how do we replicate that kind of cooperation in agric, in finance, and formalizing it? Does that make sense? Yeah. Do you have what are your thoughts on that? How can we do that more? Because it's not just about being in our silos. The Europeans perceive Europe as one market. North America is one market. If you look at the populations of the individual countries in West Africa, perhaps it might make more sense to see ourselves as one market. Can I weigh in on that? Yes, please. So one of my biggest struggles with our beautiful continent is the fact that so few of us will ever get to see it. And why is that? The movement of people and goods on this continent is one of the most difficult things ever. I have responsibility for 14 countries in Africa, and I've been very fortunate to travel to probably about more than half of the continent. But I can tell you, for every single one of those experiences, a torturous visa process to be able to get on the plane. And that is probably the biggest problem that we have in this continent, is that we will never be able to get to the table and have the conversations if you can't come to the table because you can't even get on the plane, you know? So I think that if there's one thing that we can do to really affect change is to be able to bring down those walls. Regional trading blocks are important. They have their benefits. We were just talking about this in the room before we came out. They have their benefits for sure. But, you know, if we go back to the visions that our forefathers had, the Kwame Nkrumahs of the world and of Africa, that was the vision. And I think this idea that, you know, you have to overcome so many hoops to be able to go to your neighbor, especially with the world becoming a global village, is mind-boggling. So we have to be able to overcome that. That's a fundamental thing. And governments can create policies that allow that to happen, as Ghana has now with very open borders.
Thank you. Tsonam.
Yeah, thank you. So I'd like to speak to that. I'm not trying to hold brief for African Union for any reason, but I think that a lot has happened over the past years that ought to be acknowledged. So if you look at the Agenda 2063, we have the fast-track programs and initiatives, which we hope to achieve by that's the 10 years, so that will be 2023. Now, we intend to have integrated high-speed train network that is connecting the continent from Cape to Cairo. That project has already commenced. Then there's supposed to be African commodity strategy. We're going to have continental free trade area. We are going to have Pan-African e-network. We're going to have African passport and free movement of people. So I'm happy to announce to Elizabeth that just last year in Kigali, the presidents of Africa have just outdoored the African passport. In fact, it's been issued to all the presidents.
Of course.
Now, every country is now they are now internalizing the process of having every citizen of Africa to have access to this passport. It will happen. They've given themselves up to 2023. How many years more? About 5 years or so more.
Too many.
Yeah, it may sound laughable, but the reality is that it's happening. Because the leaders have realized that there's no way we can achieve the unity and oneness in development without having to have free movement among our people. So it's really happening. We have the Grand Inda Dam project, which is in Democratic Republic of Congo. When this project is completed, we'll have about 39,000 megawatts, which will be the biggest power installed capacity on the continent of Africa. Then there's already a Pan-African annual forum that happens. That will be happening every year, which bring all key stakeholders together to deliberate on the development of the continent. There's another thing that I would encourage all of you to take advantage of, which is the Pan-African Virtual University, where there are selected universities on the continent. I think Ibadan University is part. There's Kenyatta University. So you just apply, and African Union pay the entire cost for you to have masters in science, in technology, either masters or PhD, in selected programs. I really encourage all of you to assess those opportunities. So gradually but surely, we're getting there.
Okay, thank you. You're going to be in trouble with me now. You talk about African passport.
Yes.
Can we come back next year, and can you help as an elected member? You're a member, you're a guy, right? Can you help us? Can you help the Yali network secure these passports in the next 2-3 years?
Yes, so interestingly, most of this organization I wish I have the power to.
Okay,
I wish I have the power to say yes, but it's happening. The truth is, every country must ratify this agreement. But the good thing is that all the leaders have endorsed it. It is now left with the country passport office to operationalize it. Ghana already, if you're coming to Ghana, you can, once you're an African, you can just pick visa at the port. I think that's a step ahead of everybody else. But we're saying that by 2023, all this will be realizable, because that's the timeline they've given to themselves. But what I'm saying is that to the extent that we have a timeline, it is only fair to appreciate that indeed something is happening.
Thank you very much. I think it's important that we understand the process. You know, we talked about knowledge and ignorance and technology, but we need to understand what we can do with what we have now. Nana, you wanted to say something?
Talking about collaborations between African countries on how to achieve a common goal. This year, during the pre-gender summit, the 9th pre-gender summit in Addis Ababa, the theme was harnessing the demographic dividend through investment in youth, empowering young people, especially young women. So Her Excellency, the former AU chairperson, Dr. Nkosazana Zuma, emphasized on the need for African youth to collaborate and break barriers. She said, you shouldn't, because you do business in Nigeria doesn't mean you should stick to all the villages and states in Nigeria. If you cannot penetrate DRC or Ghana, you should look for somebody that does the same thing to collaborate with the person. You can't stay and want to just make name for yourself. That is what kills us most of the time. We want to just handle everything alone. If you have an organization, you deliberate, you delegate assignments, tasks to people or to your subordinates. You can't handle everything alone. At times you prioritize. Based on priority, you handle issues, maybe based on its importance or urgency. And then that which you can handle at the moment, you assign tasks to people. So I think there's also the need for us as fellows, Mandela Washington Fellows, we have that bond already, and the networking spirit. And there's just something about Mandela Fellows. We all have a daring spirit. I noticed that most fellows are fearless. Recently, one of our fellows in Nigeria sued a governor and won the case. And you can imagine. You can imagine what will happen if we decide to come in batches from different parts of Africa to achieve a common goal. So collaboration is paramount.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. No. I wanted to add that actually for the last 2 days I've been in a meeting here that has been discussing regional integration in West Africa and looking specifically at what Ghana's responsibilities are. And most importantly, how and why, or why and how the people should engage. Because when we talk about integration, it's not governments. We can have, and we do have in West Africa, regional integration, free movement, a policy on free movement. But from Accra to Burkina Faso, it has been said there are about 40 stops. So you can have the policy, but you must look at the implementation. Many of us have ECOWAS passports, and we fly back and forth. It's easy to fly. But for many of our people, they are not flying. They are not using our airports. They are using the other borders. How easy is it for a Ghanaian to move from Togo to Cote d'Ivoire, to Accra, to Togo, or to, Benin, without being harassed? In fact, at the meeting yesterday, somebody was saying, if you show your passport, you are even more harassed than the one who doesn't have a passport. So we can talk about regional integration. And we like I said, we have beautiful policies, amazing policies in West Africa. We must look at the implementation and the how. If we are talking about regional integration, how are we addressing the issue of language? The Francophone, Anglophone divide. And we forget the Lusophones. You are here? Yes. We forget the Lusophones. How are we addressing that? And for many of our countries, it's not even French or English or Portuguese. We have common languages. Hausa cuts across, Yoruba, Ewe, even Akan. I had a 2-hour conversation in Abuja with an Ivorian gentleman who could not speak a lot of English, and I couldn't speak a lot of French. We spoke in Twi for 2 hours. And he even knew some words, Twi words, better than I, the Ghanaian who prided myself in speaking Twi, could say. So how are we taking advantage of some of these things? And trading, even trading amongst ourselves. We trade more with Europe and America than we trade amongst ourselves in West Africa. We are talking about the youth. We actually have an ECOWAS Youth Center based in Burkina Faso. How many of us here know about that center? And even at our country levels, we are supposed to have national units that are supposed to enable the liaison between what goes on at the ECOWAS regional level in terms of policies and the domestication at the national level, and enable the engagement with civil society. We don't even know about the units. They hardly engage in our different countries. So we can talk, and it's good. We talk a lot about the policies that we have, and they are wonderful, but they don't work. And so that is where we must put our emphasis. That is where we must, and that's where I think that the Yali Fellows, and thank you for the point you made. You guys here are already working on regional integration. By your very setup, you are integrating. So how are you going to move this to another level? In your different countries, how are you going to ensure that the different projects that you are working on do not only benefit your countries, but could also benefit other countries? How would you collaborate with each other across borders, across languages, to strengthen your impact as West Africans? Look, we are over 300 million people in West Africa. If we come together, we are going to be a very strong force when you look at the market. Now we are all these little countries, with the exception of Nigeria, which of course has its own clouds. Why don't we come together? And it's not the governments coming together, which is what has been happening. It's the people. And the people is you and I. What are we going to do? So that would be my point. I think that the Yali Fellows and the projects you are working on and your networking, when you think, don't only think your country, think West Africa and see what you are doing. Student exchanges, for example, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Togo, whatever. How do we learn? Instead of the various meetings that we have at the ECOWAS level, can we be exchanging our people? So these are some of the things that I believe we need to talk about, work on. And how do you engage you because of who you are? And you already said you are very daring already. And you have had some training, you've had some exposure. How do you engage the stakeholders in your countries? You've come for this beautiful forum. When you go back, how do you engage your youth ministries? Because I'm sure many of us have youth ministries in our countries. And they all have policies. Engage them. What is the policy? What are the programs? What are the structures that are supporting these? Where are the resources? How can we be a part of it? And if they don't have the ideas, give them ideas. But I think that the young people in our different countries need people like you to lead. That's why you are leaders. I mean, we talk about future leaders. You are not future leaders. You are leaders now. So take up that responsibility of leading and engage the policy makers in your country to not only the formulation of the policy, but the implementation and the monitoring of the policies.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to call for questions. I saw a few hands going up a few minutes ago on this side. Have you changed your mind? Okay. The lady in front here.
Thank you so much. My name is Ernidia Tavares. I'm from Cabo Verde, Lusophone country. I have some fellows here from Lusophone countries too. And because I heard something that hurt me, so I thought I have to speak. I'm not here to advocate for those who are irresponsible, but I feel that there are things that should be said. I'm not irresponsible, and I think that nobody here is irresponsible. But I think that youth who are irresponsible is for something. There is a deficit of responsibility. Yes, I agree. I'm not saying who's to blame, but we need to know the roots to treat the disease. You don't plant bananas to expect to collect pineapple. So if you want responsible youth, you need to teach them how to be responsible. Things doesn't happen like overnight. It starts at home, I'm sure. And I'm sorry, but we need examples. We need leaders who set examples. It's just like a baby. A baby doesn't born like running. You have to work with a baby to show her or he how to take the first steps, and then the baby itself learns how to run. It's the same thing, just like raising a child. So for us, for our leaders, unfortunately, I think that they don't know how to teach youth how to be responsible with their examples. They don't set good examples. I don't like to generalize, but this is like the common sense. Just look at us, YALI program. You can say it's a great opportunity. Yes, it is. For responsible youth. Yes, it is. But who created this program? It doesn't come from our home leaders. This is just something to think about. I think there is an explanation for those youth who are not responsible, and the explanation is because we don't have good leaders who lead by setting examples. And this is because they don't want the development of our country. They are only interested in the development of their bank account. That's it for me.
Thank you. Nana, you want to give a quick response to that? Very quickly.
First of all, our leaders see the youth as a competition, not as helpers. So I don't think they would give you that opportunity. We have a lot. It's not like we don't have youth in government or establishments, but these youth are limited. Unfortunately, they are not opportuned, which limits to like be, like I said earlier, in the decision making level. So it limits their efficiency. They are there, but they are not enough to represent us, and that affects the youth in its entirety. And I feel Mandela Fellows have a role to play. You mentioned, sorry, Nana, you mentioned that we have beautiful policies in West Africa. But these policies, the government claimed that the youth are the beneficiaries of those policies, but they are never involved in formulation or reviews. So I don't know how we can like tap from whatever it is they are doing. But if I know Mandela Fellows can achieve that, we can start from our countries. You mentioned about regional integration. I think we will not just burst into other countries. We can start from somewhere, and then one success story, maybe from Nigeria, can give birth to several others in other African countries.
Okay,
that's what I feel.
From one Nana to the other, you guys can, during lunch, talk about how to solve this thing, right? From Nigeria to Ghana. I'd like to take, there's a gentleman at the back there. Yeah? Larry.
Larry.
I was going to come.
You know Larry.
Charles.
Yes?
Good afternoon. My name is Olumuyiwa Suleiman from Nigeria.
You want to comment?
Please, I want to ask them, my question is for Elizabeth. Since all of you on the high table come from different sectors of the economy, and from the civil society, Nana is an entrepreneur, you are a trainer. How do we ensure what we call multi-sector collaborations to achieve results in Africa?
Would you repeat it more slowly, please? I'm having a hard time.
How can we work together to create some kind of multi-sectoral collaborations to solve problems in Africa? there was something I saw during the fellowship that stayed with me. And everywhere I go, I repeat it all the time. The city of Phoenix in Arizona set a target for themselves. They want to ensure diversion of waste from the landfills of 40% by 2020. And what they did was this. They took that problem to the Arizona State University to develop a solution. And every week, they send a staff from their office to go to ASU to understand how they are developing those solutions and how they can work to achieve that target. And it stayed with me, for real. And since I came back, I talk about that everywhere I go. A city, a government take a problem to a university to design a solution to the problem, and they take their staff to learn those solutions or how to achieve those solutions. And I spent 2 days there, and it was just perfect. And I understood the problem. I understood how to work and achieve results for that, to achieve a solution for it. So I saw the way different sectors of the economy work together to set targets and achieve a desired result. So in Africa, or in West Africa as it is, how can we bring about a multi-sectoral collaboration to achieve results? People from the civil society, entrepreneurs, and people in public sectors. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Elizabeth, you want to?
That was an ambitious question. I'll take a stab at it, but I don't know that I can answer it completely. I think that first of all, it's important to have very bold dreams. I think we need to be very clear about what it is that we want to achieve and what it is that we aspire to have for our African continent. And I think for the most part, we know what it is, right? The thing that people dream about and what we want for this continent, we want basic things to start with, and then we can build on that. We want to have reliable sources of water and energy and so on and so forth, markets that are organized. But fundamentally, I think that what we need to be able to do is grow the muscle of young people to recognize opportunity. That's where you are able to then start transcending the barriers that exist across sectors and seeing how each one touches the other. You know, if we talk about the need for technology, for example, technology to be used more readily across Africa, well, we're still having an energy crisis. Most countries, very few countries, are providing more than 50% of the energy needs in the country. So that's an opportunity. So there's an interrelatedness there. There's an interrelatedness between technology and health, technology and education, and not just technology, I'm using that as an example, but all these sectors touch with one another. And one of the things that we're seeing as a trend now is that a lot of the responsibility for these common goods are being put on the private sector. And it is stressing the private sector. It is affecting the level of investment that's being brought into our part of the continent. So we need to be able to look at all of these things holistically. But I think, first of all, we need to establish what the dream is, establish what each sector's responsibility is, and then we can attack it systematically.
Thank you. Tsonam?
Yeah, so what I keep on hearing is that it sounds as though youth appears to be far removed from action. My suggestion is that we are the action. We are the people who should be able to take in the actions in favor of development. I'll quickly use myself as an example. I resigned from an investment bank. I started my company with a friend. Over the years, 2-3 years down the line, we merged as a national firm. Now we have clients in 8 countries. I currently chair the AGI, Association of Ghana Industries, in Accra. So that is the biggest voice of all companies in Accra. As a result of that, I represent industry in government. I represent the voice of industry. Every opportunity there are that government decide, every policy, my voice is part of it. And so, for example, Ghana government has just outlawed the one district, one factory policy. That policy was highly engineered from my office. And now it's a national policy. Now, as a young person, I can just apply and the government to support me directly to promote my business. What I am saying to you, a young person, is that take the action yourself. It is you, nobody else will do it for you. You can never wait for any government or any leader anywhere. You are the leader. You have to do it from your end and the world will be your own. Thank you.
Thank you. More questions? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Ada Mosai. I'm from Nigeria. My question is directed to Nana. I'm very excited to actually see you. I read your bio before coming here. You're doing a lot of things that I dream of doing. So my goal was to meet with you, and I'm using this opportunity to ask that I have access to you after this program, and you will dedicate 1 hour of your time every month to please share with me some of the insights that you've built along the years. But now to my question. You talked about, so ma'am, you talked about, you alluded to, the culture as one of the root causes, behind the limits we place on our young people. And I was very glad. Because from my experience as a young person, I think that's the baseline. All the systems, all the limitations and strictures that we encounter stem from how our way of life in Africa and how we perceive the youth in the room. A 26-year-old in the room is just automatically incompetent. I plan for you, I make decisions for you, I think for you. And it has become a cycle of self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, he mentioned, you be the leader. That's like preaching to the converted. We are here in the room because we have defied those odds. But when we look at the numbers, the real numbers, we are a very sad minority. The rest of our counterparts are limited by either lack of knowledge because of the, rigged education system. They're limited by lack of access to resources. They're limited by lack of access to the right networks where this information will come about. And time again, nothing is changing culturally. What do we do to tackle culture? We all have many grand ideas. I have ideas burning in my heart about how I can change the narrative. How can I promote successes of young people so that they begin to shift, how they view the... But, when you look at the challenge of connecting idea with resource and then the right mentoring and the right networks. Yes, in this room, we're all privileged to have it. But how do we democratize this model to ensure that every young, or at least 90 out of 100 young Africans will have this same opportunity to counter a cultural narrative so that it's not a cycle where we are fulfilling the, they perceive us this way and we come out and we justify it. Because the truth is, in the scheme of things, we are not the most competent people in the room. If you check a young person and check, we are not producing the fresh ideas that we ought to be bringing to the table. This is the narrative, the real narrative of the African youth. We shouldn't use ourselves to judge what's existing out there. So, Ma, because of everything you have been doing and how you have brought, to the fore the role of civil society in advancing development, not just public sector, private sector partnerships, what can you recommend for how we can shift this dialogue, shift this narrative, and really counter culture? Because I think that's our real enemy. Thank you.
Anna.
Great question.
Quickly.
Let's talk after. But I think if you want to change culture, and culture is dynamic. In some of our countries, women couldn't wear trousers some time ago. It's changed. How can we change culture? We have to engage those who have the influence and power to do so. And that is why I talked about engaging the institutions that have that power. And I had talked about the religious institutions mainly, but we also have our traditional institutions. And it's not easy engaging them, I admit, but we have to do that. In 2004, I led a coalition of about 200 organizations. I was just really the spokesperson. It's not as if I formed the coalition, but I was the leader for the coalition, the face of it, to advocate for the passage of a domestic violence bill in Ghana. When we were talking about domestic violence then, it was not an easy thing to discuss domestic violence. In fact, there were many people who thought that what we were advocating for was going to break marriages. Some of the things that we did then was to engage the religious groups, to engage the traditional institutions, and it helped. Today, in Ghana, you even have men who are reporting that they have been battered. You see, somebody is laughing. But you see, that is one of the things. So the men will not report because they will be laughed at. But what I want to say is, today, people can talk about domestic violence and say that, look, if you do this, they will report you to the police station. or you can be reported. It's not something that changed overnight. It took many, 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 many years. And it didn't start in 2004. It started way before then. So it will take time to change, particularly cultural attitudes and cultural norms. It takes time, but it is possible. And the way to do that is, first of all, to have the boldness, like you all have, to say, look, we ourselves are going to be different. Two, we are going to influence some lives that will be different, because you also have your sphere of influence. So how have you influenced those people within your sphere of influence? And then thirdly, we will engage the decision makers, those who can actually change things within the culture, to make sure that they buy into the understanding that we have and realize that it's important to change. So I mean, this would be my suggestion for changing culture. And it's not something that is going to just happen. We have to have that mobilization of like minds, like we have in this room, and many more of us. And even as you change 3 people, everybody here changes 3 people, and those people change 3 people. We widen that sphere of influence, and we engage those who are the decision makers, so that our children in our families, when they go to church, they are hearing, look, a man cannot beat a woman. Not that because the man is the head, the man has authority, dominance over the woman. They are hearing it, and they will change. They go to the mosque, they are hearing the same thing. They go to school, they are hearing the same thing. They are reading the same thing in their textbooks. That is when culture will change.
Thank you. So we're wrapping up now. I take one more question, and then I'll allow Tsonam to address that question. And then, because I'm a Nigerian, if you are a Nigerian, please don't raise your hand. So I expect to see hands down. So the lady here, thank you.
Thank you all very much. The question basically is to everybody, but like you said, maybe she could address it. I want to know, how are they including youth in their own organizations when it comes to internship and volunteerism? Nowadays, employers want you to have experience before even graduating or going to work. That's the reason they tell you 10 years of experience. So what are you people doing to address these things? Thank you.
Okay, sorry, what's your name and where are you from?
Josephine Seli from Liberia.
Thank you. Tsonam, you want to address that?
Well, the reality is that you have to also understand from the side of the employer. It is very difficult and expensive to train people on the job, because you can't even guarantee the future whether the person is going to live with you for long. What it requires is for you, the young person yourself, to groom yourself, not necessarily to have a formal employment 10 years or so, but while schooling, engage in non-academic activities that allow you to accumulate skills required for the job market. But I was going to speak about the cultural issue, because you see, it's very, very significant. The biggest weapons of the people who rule us is the illiteracy of the masses. And that has to be changed. The way that can be changed is twofold. Number one, through our educational system, where we have a curricula that focus on changing these things, and also providing mentors and role models. Because if I see a doctor who is doing so well, I want to grow to aspire to be a doctor. But if I see a farmer who is very poor, I don't want to be a farmer. And so we need to have farmers who are role models that create economic value, that are big, that young people can aspire to be. Thank you.
Thank you. So on that note, I'm sure the panelists, Tsonam, Nana, and Elizabeth, will be available to engage after this panel. But we need to close now. And I'd like to first of all, and finally also thank our panelists. Kindly give them a round of applause, please. So we've been talking about how to engage the youth in national economic development. We've touched a range of issues, and at the end of the day, it's all about engagement, engagement, and engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you.